Hey, everybody, welcome to That Expert Show, where you help run the show. I'm Anna Canzano. Thanks so much for joining us today. Great topic today, microblading. Have you heard of this? It's quite popular right now. I've got friends and family that have either done it or they're talking about doing it. I'm thinking about trying it myself because let's face it, eyebrows are tough. I know this is not the most serious topic in the world, but it's something that a lot of us struggle with on a daily basis. If we're trying to put on makeup, I feel like I've got the rest of it kind of figured out, but eyebrows are a challenge for me. And I was really nervous doing this episode today because I was like, this is going to be an episode all about eyebrows. And of course, this would be the day that I have a particularly hard time doing them. There is a procedure called microblading. There's related procedures called microfeathering or microshading, and then something else along those lines called ombre. All of them involve some kind of semi-permanent makeup in some form. And we have a great expert lined up to talk with us today about this. Let me know your questions live right now if you're watching this live and we can get you some answers. Our expert today was educated at Brow Design International. She is a clinical esthetician and owns her own salon called Brow Genius. She joins us live from Texas right now. Whitney Moon, thanks so much for being with us.
Hi, glad to be here.
So Whitney, let's start just by explaining the basic concept of microblading and what it is.
Okay, so microblading is a type of tattoo and it implants pigment just under the surface of your skin. So that particular technique involves just a hand tool that scratches little lines into the skin that resemble hair strokes.
And so what is the difference between microblading and its sort of more subtle sister, microfeathering, or like you said, microshading?
Good question. So microshading uses usually a machine. You can use a hand tool for it, but most people use a machine. It's a little bit gentler on the skin. It just sort of taps the pigment into the skin instead of the scratching motion that you have with microblading. Microfeathering is just another word for microblading. So it's just a different name, same thing.
Okay. And then there's a third term that I see thrown around as well, or a fourth term if you're counting, ombre. And what is that and how is it same or different?
So ombre is a type of microshading, and all it's really saying when you're saying ombre shading is that you are shading more diluted in the fronts toward this part of the brow. And then as you get toward the tail of the brow, it gets a little bit more saturated. So it's kind of like the trendy Instagram eyebrow look that you see on the Kardashians, for instance. That's considered ombre shading.
Okay. And these things, can we talk about the cost a little bit? Because I think, at least at first brush, when you look at the cost of these different procedures, they can set you back. It's what's held me back so far in doing this because it is a bit of an investment to do this with your face.
Absolutely. Definitely an investment. So the cost, depending on where you're located, you're looking at on the lower end, maybe $300, and on the higher end, up to $1,000, depending on what part of the country you live in, basically, and the expertise of the person that's doing the procedure. So if you fall anywhere within that range, that's considered normal. The cost and the reason it costs so much is because the training not required, but the training that you expect from the person who's doing the procedure costs a lot of money. When it's done well, the materials and the inks are costly as well. And a really good artist just tends to be in higher demand. So just because of the demand, the price goes up, basically.
So let's talk about that training that you just mentioned. As you said, it's not always required. So what is the homework that you need to do before booking an appointment with somebody? Because it can be tempting, and I'm guilty of this, to look around for people who do microblading in your area and just pick the cheapest possible option. But that's not really the best way to go about deciding on where you would get this done.
Right. You definitely don't want to use price as one of your main factors in selecting your artist. You want to see that they have a website, for instance, that has a lot of images of their work, both fresh and healed. healed results are super important because sometimes the brows look great right after the treatment, but they heal very poorly. We're working with skin, so it's not a predictable canvas. So it's not like drawing on paper and knowing exactly how it's going to turn out. A really skilled artist is going to create results when it heals in the skin that look very natural. So look for healed results for sure. Look for how long they've been doing the procedure. Sometimes beginning artists can be promising, and it's okay to pay a lower price for a less experienced person, but just beware, of course, that they may not have as much experience, just like with anything else. You want to make sure that the facility is a licensed facility. So it's different than the person being licensed. The facility itself also has to have a license for tattooing. So it'll depend on your state's regulations for what is appropriate there. But they need to use single-use instruments, of course, very good sterile technique. Excellent reviews are important. In this day and age, the internet helps because you can actually go to Google for most businesses and read reviews and see what people say.
Right.
And then, of course, word of mouth is always a good way to find out too.
But you bring up a good point, though, because depending on where you live, so the facility, more often than not, you're saying has to be licensed, but not every state requires that somebody who is doing this work, microblading and other forms of it, are required to be licensed, right?
That's true. So I can't speak for every state, but in Texas, the individual who's doing the tattooing does not actually have to be licensed. There is no license for the person doing the tattooing. It's only a license for the facility. So, for instance, I do not have a tattoo license because there is no tattoo license in Texas. My facility, the room that I'm sitting in, is licensed in the state of Texas for me to be able to do tattooing in this room. So that's a little scary when you think about it. I don't know how that compares to other states, but there's no real required training for the artist that is checked up on by the state, for instance.
That's really interesting. So then if there is no requirement for a training license and the level of experience that they need to be at to even operate in the state, what's kind of the fallback then? Like you said, look for feedback, look for reviews from people, but is there a way that you can actually check what kind of training they've received, whether it was from a school that was in person or whether it was over the internet? Because it seems to me like these places are popping up everywhere. People have realized this is a lucrative way to make a living.
That's definitely true. So microblading artists are kind of a dime a dozen at this point. It's kind of blown up in the United States, and the market is completely saturated with people performing this procedure that may or may not be actually qualified to be doing it. So because you can't really check on a specific licensure, that puts you in kind of a vulnerable position as a potential client. The way that you can check on the person's training is just ask them. You can ask them what company they trained with. You can Google the company and see what's involved with that training. A lot of times, even if somebody has training that was somewhat minimal, there's such a learning curve with these procedures that just experience with working on the skin does a lot. So regardless of the level of training they received, if they don't have a lot of experience working on skin, they're not going to have as much ability to work with all of the variety of different skin types that people have to deal with.
Interesting. And so is microblading, like from the client point of view, can just anybody have it done, or do you have to have a particular skin type that it will work better with than others?
There's definitely a very small cross-section of people, surprisingly, that are ideal candidates for microblading. So even though microblading is the buzzword, that's what everybody thinks they want for their eyebrows, that's not necessarily going to be something that you're even a good candidate for. I would say that 70% of my clientele does micro shading as opposed to microblading. And most of them come in thinking that they want microblading because that's what they've heard of. That's what they assume is the only way to achieve a natural result. But once I tell them a little bit more about the procedure and what to expect and what works best with their skin type, they decide to go ahead and go with the micro shading.
And the difference in skin type is what? Like if I have more oily skin versus somebody with more just normal to dry skin, are the results better for one type of procedure than the other?
Yes. So oily skin does not tend to do well with hair strokes, with microblading. What happens is maybe right after the procedure, you see nice, crisp hair strokes, but during the healing process, what happens is the hair strokes will kind of blur together and they end up looking like micro shading in the end. But the problem with going ahead and trying with microblading on that skin type just to see what happens is that you can get kind of a blotchy result, or part of the hair stroke will stay, but the rest will blur out. And then you have a totally different problem to work with, and that is blotchy, splotchy eyebrows. And that's obviously not what anybody's going for. If you have oily skin, or if you have mature skin, basically anybody over the age of 35 to 40, depending on your skin type, the skin starts to get a little bit more delicate as we age. So microblading is a little bit harsh on the skin and sometimes has trouble healing well. So depending on how thin your skin is, a lot of redness, underlying redness in the skin, sometimes means that the skin is too vascular to deal with microblading. So I'll recommend shading in that case, since it's a little gentler on the skin. With just those factors alone, with as many people that have oily skin, mature skin, thin skin, redness, really porous skin, large pores, or deep wrinkles in that eyebrow area, that pretty much covers about 70% of the population. So you can see where microblading doesn't necessarily work for everybody.
Should the pricing be relatively the same? Like say I go in and the person that wants to try this procedure on me says, oh no, your skin's too oily, or for whatever reason we have to do micro shading instead. Is the pricing the same, or is that an opportunity for a service provider to try and upsell me?
Well, that's going to depend on the provider, of course. In my case, I advertise the same price no matter what. So it doesn't matter which technique you use. Just me doing your eyebrows is one cost. And that's because I don't want people selecting the procedure based on the price.
Right.
I want them to pick what works best for their skin type. I think there is sometimes a little bit of a difference based on how long the artist takes to do each technique. So maybe they are pricing for the length of time they're spending on you. But in my case, the time doesn't really change too much for me depending on which technique I use.
Got it. Okay. And this obviously is a pretty hot topic. I mean, Nancy was saying she was looking forward to this segment because the outer third of her brows have thinned out. She would love to not have to fill them in every day. Heather on Facebook was saying she's a victim of 90s overplucking. That's a lot of us. She's terrible, and filling them in is so hard. She's been eyeing microblading for a while, and so she's tuning in as well today. M.E. Zelda on Facebook, she's getting hers done next week, so this is good timing for her. And Nia just had hers done a few weeks ago, and she likes the results so far. She's curious to see how long it lasts. That's part of what makes the cost potentially more palpable, I guess, is like if I think that, okay, if I invest this much up front, this is something that will last X period of time so that I don't have to come back and do it again. What should people expect?
So as far as how long it lasts, that's another good point when comparing microblading and microshading. Microblading tends to last, depending on the skin type, you can expect to come back for a touch-up after about a year. In my experience with microblading, people tend to need to come back sooner than that. Maybe 6 months, 9 months, and then you're back for a touch-up. Now, most people or most artists do not charge the same cost for touch-ups as they do for the initial session, so you're not spending that big chunk of money again. But microshading tends to last a little bit longer. So when I do microshading on someone, I generally don't see them for a full year, sometimes 18 months to 2 years. And the touch-up, whenever they come back, is going to be based on how long it's been since I've seen them, and therefore how long it's going to take for me to get more pigment in. So it's, it's not going to be as long of an appointment. It's not going to be as costly when you come back for a touch-up. But ballpark, I would say, for any procedure is going to be around a yearly touch-up.
Okay, and let's talk about the pain aspect of this. Angela on Twitter was saying, it is amazing if you struggle with too few brows. She says she has several tattoos and she's waxed regularly. That's much more painful. But, she says she will continue to get microblading done. Are there measures that are taken before the procedure to alleviate the pain?
Yes, and that's going to differ from artist to artist as well. But most artists are going to use a pre-numb. So they're going to numb you for anywhere from 10 to 30 minutes. And then a lot of times a secondary numbing is used as well in between passes. And that's how I do it. I have 2 different numbing processes that I use to keep you comfortable throughout the procedure. So everybody has a different pain tolerance, of course. But the vast majority of people are extremely comfortable during the procedure. It's not uncommon for people to fall asleep during the procedure. So obviously they can't be hurting that bad. One comment that I've gotten a lot is that the tweezing is the most painful part of the process, because sometimes I'll have to tweeze some of the hairs that are around the edges of the shape, which brings me to another point. We do not shave your eyebrows off. A lot of people ask me that. They ask if they're going to lose their eyebrow hair for this process, and no, we want you to keep as much hair as possible. But yeah, as far as the pain goes, it's very tolerable for most people.
Okay. Yeah, that was one of my questions too, is do you start with a clean slate? And
yeah, definitely not.
That might be a little troublesome. So help me understand the procedure from beginning to end. So let's say I find somebody that I'm interested in having this done by. Is there first a consultation appointment before the actual procedure, or do the 2 go hand in hand?
Well, that is partly up to you and partly up to the artist. In my case, I don't do a consultation before unless the person has previous permanent makeup in their eyebrows. So if they've had a previous microblading, previous brow tattoo, microshading, they need to send me a clear up-close photo of their eyebrows so that I can see how much pigment is present. Sometimes that's not enough and I need them to come in for me to see in person. But the average person does not come in for a consultation first. That's kind of built into the appointment time. The other exception for me is if a man is coming in for microblading, I do like to see them in person first and feel their skin and get an idea of what I'm working with.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know men were getting this procedure. They're getting it done on their brows or other parts of their face?
They're doing their eyebrows for various reasons. Some of the same reasons as women get it. A lot of women get this procedure done because of health issues. Thyroid problems can cause thinning of the eyebrows. Alopecia is another big one. So men suffer from these conditions as well, and sometimes just get self-conscious that they are missing half an eyebrow or an entire eyebrow. Yeah. So they come in and they just want, of course, a super natural look. In most cases, occasionally you get men who want a really defined eyebrow, but most men want it to be very subtle. But because it's so nuanced when it comes to men, I feel more comfortable seeing them in person first.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, and what makes it so natural looking, if we're talking about microblading, for example, is that because it's semi-permanent, it's actually sitting on the surface of your skin, right? So there's kind of like a 3D effect to it. Is that right?
So I'm going to go back to the term semi-permanent because it can be misconstrued a lot of times, and there's a lot of controversy in the permanent makeup community about using the word semi-permanent. Technically, the procedure is permanent because any type of tattooing of the skin is permanent. It's causing permanent changes to the skin. So while some people may fade out over time to almost nothing, other people are always going to have some faint shadow of that pigment. So some people use the term semi-permanent simply because it needs to be touched up over the years, but really it is permanent.
Okay. And then that's good to know as you go into the process. And then is there, I mean, it's different from like using an eyebrow pencil or powder because of the way that it looks, kind of the natural effect that it takes on, right?
Yes. So when it comes to microblading, we're doing individual hair strokes, which creates a really wispy look, and it kind of imitates hair strokes, your natural hair strokes. And on an ideal candidate, it's going to kind of blend seamlessly with the hair that you actually have in your eyebrows, and that's what gives it kind of a dimensional effect. However, you can also get a really dimensional, soft, kind of seamless effect with micro shading. It's just a difference in the way that the pigment is applied underneath the skin. So even though it's not in straight little lines like hair strokes, you can use different techniques that almost pixelate the pigment onto the skin, and that creates more of a dimensional, not a flat look. And that's artist dependent, of course. So some people are a little bit more skilled with creating a nice three-dimensional looking brow that blends seamlessly with the hair, and others kind of not so much. And they can create that dreaded Sharpie marker tattoo look.
The constant look of surprise. I don't want to walk away from my appointment looking like I'm just constantly surprised or angry. That would be a nightmare. Okay, so let's go back to the timeline of the appointment. So you go in, usually the consultation is combined with the appointment, and then next, I guess, is the numbing procedure.
Right. So the consultation's first. We sit there, we discuss your goals. I usually ask my clients to come in with their eyebrow makeup on, how they usually do it, if they do wear makeup, because that gives me an idea of what I'm working with and what they're perhaps expecting. Sometimes at that point, I have to talk them out of the crazy way that they've been drawing their eyebrows on, and that can be challenging. Most of the time, people have a fairly reasonable idea of what their eyebrows should look like, but that's what the consultation part is for. Then I just clean the area really well, and I do a pre-draw. And the pre-draw just gives you an idea of the placement of the brows and gives you a chance to give feedback on what you think about the shape. So I'll do the shape as I envision it based on your bone structure, certain measurements, and then you can look in the mirror and tell me if you want to tweak it in any way. And then after that, we do the numbing process. That takes roughly 15 to 20 minutes, and then we get started.
And then once you get started, how long is that procedure usually? An hour or 2 or 3?
About an hour for me.
Okay. And then and then what happens? You go home and you've got all these little cuts in your eyebrows, and do they look great immediately?
So most people are shocked at how good it looks right afterwards. I try to over-prepare them and tell them before I hand them the mirror that it's going to look darker and more intense, that it's actually going to heal. And so when they look in the mirror, most of the time they're pleasantly surprised, and they're like, oh, that's not so bad. So it's not, the vast majority of people don't have a lot of redness or inflammation or swelling or anything crazy like that. It just looks like they have on good eyebrow makeup for the most part. And so over the course of a few days after that, they're going to look a little dark and solid, especially if they're not wearing makeup on the rest of their face. So I tell them one way to cope with that period is to wear makeup elsewhere on their face, because they won't feel like they're just walking around like with a beacon on their eyebrows.
Okay, that's good advice. And then what happens after a couple of days once the healing starts? Are there ointments that you're putting on daily after this is done too?
There is definitely aftercare involved. That's going to be artist dependent. They're going to have different recommendations depending on what they prefer. In my case, you take care of your eyebrows once an hour for the first day until bedtime, and then for the following week after that, you only have to take care of them once a day before bedtime. And by taking care of them, it's basically cleaning them, drying them, and applying an ointment that I give you.
Okay. And then, I mean, does it get itchy? Like, is there scabbing that falls off? What happens in the not so pretty phase of microblading?
So the first 3 to 5 days is the dark, intense phase. And then around day 5, you're going to go into the peely, flaky phase.
Aha.
Depending on your skin type and the technique of the person who's applied the tattoo, either you'll have just mild flaking or you will have scabbing that can be heavy. Most of my clients don't experience heavy scabbing, and it's just some light flaking, just kind of annoying. And that lasts for about 5 days. So the whole process is maybe 10 days before you start feeling normal again.
Okay, that is good to know.
And it might itch, yes, to answer your question. Some people do get itchy, especially at the part where they start to flake.
Right. And the ointment, I assume, would help with that as well. And then, so after about 10 days, so like if you're a bride getting ready for your wedding, you're not going to want to do this any less than a month before your wedding day.
No. So if somebody tells me that they're getting married and it's soon, I tell them you need to wait till after your wedding. But it really depends. You have to consider also that these procedures are a 2-step process. So you'll have your initial appointment, and then roughly 8 weeks later, you'll have a second appointment to perfect the design. And that appointment doesn't take as long. Some people come back at that second appointment and don't really need to do anything. Some people fade a lot in between those 2 appointments and need quite a bit of work done at that time. But you have to remember that, you know, if you have a big event coming up, you're going to want to try to get both of those appointments in and give yourself time to heal for a couple of weeks after the second appointment.
Okay. And then when it comes to the follow-up within a year or more time after that, is that usually within a year, you said?
Most people do it at around a year.
Okay. And is anybody ever allergic to this process, like to the ink, or, you know, is there any way of testing whether somebody actually might have an allergic reaction before you go full bore on both eyebrows?
So that's a great question. What I like to do is on the forms that I have clients sign before they even come in to see me, I have listed the ingredients of the pigments that I use, and I'm also listing the ingredients of the Aftercare products and anything else that I intend to touch the skin with. Most people, if they have an allergy, are aware of it before they even go into this. The pigments that we use, depending on the artist, of course, but the pigments that I use have been tried and true, tested for years and years on people with very low incidence of reactions. We can do a test spot on somebody if they find themselves to be a generally sensitive individual that is prone to allergic reactions. In that case, I would have them come in and do a small test spot in an inconspicuous area, say behind their ear, and see if anything happens within a week. But I have maybe done that once in all the time I've been tattooing, and I've never had somebody have a reaction. I have had people have to cancel their appointments because they read the ingredients and realized that one of the ingredients they are sensitive to, or if they have certain metal allergies, it could be an issue with the needles that we use.
Interesting. Okay, those are all very good points to make. We have some questions coming in via Facebook that are live, so I want to make sure we answer them. Tina wants to know, she has wild gray hair in her brows. She quit plucking them, but she has to cut them. So getting shading or blading, will she have to start plucking those gray hairs?
Well, I love working with women who have salt and pepper eyebrows. And a lot of times with salt and pepper eyebrows, we have wild and crazy hairs. Those two tend to go together. So trimming them is definitely still going to be something she's going to do. Tweezing them, it will be dependent on the color that's chosen. So we can choose a color. When I have salt and pepper hair, I like to choose a color that's kind of in the mid-range between the darkest and the lightest of the hairs. That way, once it heals, the person has a better chance of not feeling like those white hairs stand out as much, and they have a better blend overall. Some people still feel like they want to either tweeze those out or tint the hair. You can do almost like coloring the hair on the top of your head. You can do regular tinting for those wild white ones. Others just like to go ahead and tweeze them out because now they have eyebrows behind that on their skin, so they're not losing their whole eyebrow if they tweeze them out.
So I think you answered the question there for Tina that Ulrike on Facebook wanted to know, which was about gray hair. So there are obviously different shades. I think she was concerned that microblading or shading with black would look really funny for somebody with gray hair.
With black?
Yes.
Okay, so black is rarely used, or it should rarely be used. Even people with super, super dark eyebrows, African American people with dark skin and nearly black hair, we still use a dark, dark brown on because black tends to heal that kind of bluish, ashy, weird. We've all seen at least one lady with tattooed eyebrows that look kind of blue-gray.
Yes.
That's what happens when you put black on the eyebrows. So even if the person had salt and pepper hair, we would be using more of an ash brown color, and we would vary how dark we would go with that pigment based on their skin tone, the hair that's present, and what their goals are with their brow. But certainly having gray hair is not a contraindication for having the procedure done.
And just to clarify, another question from Facebook, that follow-up procedure in about a year or so, that is an additional cost, right? But usually it doesn't cost as much as the initial service.
Right. So for myself, the first two treatments are covered in the initial cost. So you pay your upfront cost, that covers the initial treatment, and then 8 weeks later, your perfecting session is already paid for. Your follow-ups after that in about a year, those do come at an additional cost, but it will be significantly less than the initial procedure. In most cases, it's about half the cost of the initial procedure. If you come back before a year, in my case, it's prorated back from that cost. So it's actually less if you come back prior to a year.
Got it. Well, Whitney, it looks like you've made quite an impression on the people who are watching. Karen, who is watching via the Oregonian Facebook page, says, I want her to do mine. How do I contact her? So we'll certainly have all of your contact information available in our show notes and in our tip sheet, which we always create after the episode. Whitney, thanks so much for sharing your expertise with us. I think you've helped a lot of people today.
Thank you. I'm so excited that I was able to share.
And thank you for joining us for this episode of That Expert Show. I always appreciate your input, the questions that you share with me that we're able to answer live. That is the whole concept behind the show, is that you help run the show. You help direct where the interview goes. Like I mentioned, we will be summarizing the key points from Whitney's interview, putting them into a tip sheet that I'll post on thatexpertshow.com, our website, which you can check out. And you can always check in with us on Facebook as well, and Twitter and Instagram. I'm on Facebook at Anna Canzano, Twitter and Instagram at That Expert Show. You can catch the show after the fact on YouTube, our YouTube channel, simply That Expert Show, or search for us as a podcast. I know that's so popular now, to be able to take in the content that way as you're running errands and going about your busy day. We're on Apple iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, all those good places. Subscribe if you got something out of this episode. We do all kinds of topics like this that are just useful for everyday life. There is so much out there that is kind of depressing and brings you down these days. I started this show because I wanted to bring well-researched information that you can use in your everyday life to make you smarter, healthier, live longer, live happier, and all of that. So we're live every Monday at 11 a.m. right here on Facebook and Twitter and wherever you're watching this. See you on the next episode of That Expert Show, where you help run the show.